All right, I think that's a hack, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, how many folks do we have? And over the channel. Oh, we got quite a good turnout. Awesome, guys. So, welcome. We'll call this a hack 03Z. For me, it's 8 p.m. local over here in Merca. So, thanks everybody for showing up. Hopefully, this is going to be a great time for everybody. This is going to be Training on Tuesday, BVR and CAP. Not necessarily combat air patrol, but like capping, the art of executing a cap with another flight member. So I invite everybody to look up at the Learning Center channel if you haven't already done so. It's a text channel very near the top of this Discord. And in that, the latest post is a document that I typed up, which is I'm also streaming this document. So you can follow along on your own, or you can just watch my stream. And let's go ahead and get started with that. You'll also see on my stream some Tacview, and we'll get into that Tacview at some certain times during my briefing here. So let's really kick this off. So we're doing we're doing CAP and BVR basics today. A lot of help from folks around within the squadron. So thanks to everybody who collaborated with this. I didn't even list all the members up there. So lots of folks providing some help. So thank you very much. References for today's brief. We're mainly looking at the ALSA Brevity May 2020 at that website. If you want to go check that out, you can follow along there. And of course, DCS World in all of its fun and glory is a great reference for this in the encyclopedia and everything it has to offer. So disclaimer up front, guys, all tactics, ranges, procedures are derived purely from and for DCS World and have no intended or unintended correlation to the real world. While similar terms and definitions are taken from the real world, from the reference mentioned earlier, those are publicly available publications, and we're using that purely to form a basis for tactics in DCS. Awesome. So the ROE for this briefing, guys, it's informal. Ask questions. Please just get my attention first in Discord, and then go ahead and ask your question. We're here to learn, so let's discuss some things. The objectives for today: we're going to learn how to kill red air while avoiding the merge, and here's how we're going to do that. First, we're going to know some brevity, and we're going to go over some threats as well. Understand two-ship cap basics. Again, this is executing an actual cap where you're just kind of rotating in place. We're going to figure out how to set it up, and we're going to talk about the comm associated with that. Then we're going to understand two-ship BVR basics. We're going to go over the timeline, comm, and targeting related to that. And then we're going to also practice some BVR setups and maybe even some two-ship grinder execution. Okay. So first, we're going to have this academic discussion. Then we're going to go into a practical portion. We'll talk about the server info at the end. We have available slots listed there: 4 Tomcats, 4 Eagles, 4 Vipers, 4 Hornets, and 4 Jeffs. Okay. You guys can slot into that as you choose. I'll explain a little bit more about the setup once we get to that. There's going to be some red air that you guys will fight against. There will be a controller, call sign Maestro, and I will kind of be the supervisor for that portion as well. Okay. We'll come back to the practical portion ROE, but basically we're going to kind of take turns. We're going to watch each other execute it and have fun. Okay. So number one, why do we need to learn about this? Why do we need to use launch and leave tactics, and why do we need to use the grinder? It's basically so we can have good defense in depth, and you can kind of hold your ground, and you avoid the merge. That's a really big thing, because what we want to do is maximize our advantages of whatever airplane we're flying and whatever missiles we have. We want to maximize those advantages at range and avoid the merge, which is really where, at least for me, it's kind of a toss-up whether or not I win or lose. It's much more of an even playing field, not an evil playing field, but an even playing field. Okay, so first we're going to watch a Tacview of the value of defense in depth. This was, sorry about all this kind of mess here. Okay, we're just going to watch this a little bit, and I'm going to kind of explain why defense in depth and BVR fights are really important. So what you're going to see here, you're going to see TMO and me in an F-16 flying. This is on NTTR a while back, and you're going to see us flying 2-ship tactics, and we're going to be flying the grinder as much as we can, or at least engaging in BFR. Also, in this particular engagement, we have Raptor with us. So we kind of start off in azimuth with Raptor. TMO and I are in our own 2-ship. So basically what this first one ends up being is kind of a blue ladder. A little bit squirrely with our setup there, but we got it done. What you're going to see is TMO engaging at 28 miles, basically, against these flankers who are fast and up in the 3 block, basically. And you see TMO does get a kill there and narrowly avoids a missile there. But then Raptor is able to come in here and shoot a second missile to kill that trail flanker. Doesn't quite hit it, and then I come in with another missile and kill it. So basically that's kind of your defense in depth, is you have a backup of people behind you. So what that originally looks like is that you just have guys peeling off from the formation, and you have guys behind you to support. Now what this also does demonstrate is the danger of getting within 10 to 15 miles of a flanker, especially a flanker that's going Mach 1.3 over here. So TMO narrowly avoided a missile, but he did avoid it. We can kind of see some of the tactics that he used here to avoid it. He turned away cold and sliced down towards the ground, almost beaming that threat, but kind of dragging away as well. In this next little intercept, this is not necessarily a grind, but it's basically some BVR tactics where it's basically a 3 against 2. We shoot our missiles at range, we crank, and then we turn cold, or we would have turned cold if these guys hadn't died, but we were able to visually see the kills. As you can see, Raptor did turn cold there to kind of give us some defense in depth, and then he was ready to recommit if anybody survived. Then one more intercept here. It's basically set us up nicely for this third engagement, where TMO takes the lead, shoots these MiG-29s at about 30 nautical miles, and Raptor and I are back here, basically defense in depth, almost creating that ladder again of 3 blue air. And TMO's missile first misses. Keep in mind, this is after the latest update where the AMRAAM, basically all missiles, active missiles, got borked a little bit. So thanks for that, missiles, awesome. And then I come in, I'm able to get shots off on that 2-ship. Only one of them dies, and then Raptor and TMO are also able to recommit and target that low MiG-29. Unfortunately, he's low and hiding in the mountain, so he takes a couple missiles to die, but we're basically all over him, and we're set up and ready to go again in case he does survive. Let's see, I think there's one more in this one. Yeah, there's one more. Basically the same thing again, right? The benefit of being able to shoot initially and just turn cold, outrun any missiles. And TMO was unable to get a shot there, but then you see the benefit of yet having a third person there to shoot and put that guy defensive so I can come back in. I almost bite the bullet here against an ER, but I was able to luckily skate away unscathed. So that's really the value of defense in depth and why this is so important. All right, one more quick little Tacview, a little bit shorter than that last one there. If I can get the file.
Question, Petey.
Yeah.
For the ladder, how far were you guys separated, more or less?
It ended up being about 20 miles. We'll talk a little bit about some of those tactics and what's kind of beneficial. But yeah, it ended up being if you can separate your blue fighters by about 10 to 20 miles in between each aircraft, that works out really well because that gives everybody in the front, all the blue air in the front, time to shoot, crank, turn out, and then the guys behind them to wait for those first missiles to hit and then re-engage as required. So what we're looking at here is just me in a 1v1 in single player against a flanker. And this is demonstrating the dangers of an active threat. So we have a Su-30 up here that can carry the R-77, which is an active missile similar to the AMRAAM. You can see I'm able to get a shot off here at about 30 nautical miles. I crank. This guy goes defensive. His lock for this 27ER is broken, so I've defeated that missile. I recognize that my missile is timed out, and I haven't gotten a kill. I haven't visually seen that splash, so I shoot another missile. In the meantime, this R-77 is coming my way at a range of about 20 miles. So we're trading shots between 20 and 16 miles. I'm able to aggressively crank here and descend a little bit. You can kind of see my altitude's going down here a little bit. Still trying to keep the speed up a little bit to give my missile some energy, and then able to turn cold as soon as I possibly can when my missile goes active. His missile's still tracking me because his goes active as well, and I get that indication on my RWR, but I'm able to outrun it. There's another situation here. Wrong one. Against a MiG-29, pushing into within 20 miles, not being able to get a shot off for whatever reason. If you're not able to, you can still kind of turn away at 20 miles and defeat that missile. But what we demonstrate here is that I'm now definitely within about 15 miles, and that's going to be a big number that shows up for us later today as well. But if you're kind of in within 15 miles of these active missile threats, or even semi-active threats like the 27ER or even the 27R, slightly shorter range, it's very easy to get hit by those missiles as you try to turn hot and re-engage this threat. So here, I'm not, let's see, he shoots a 77. Yeah, I'm not being spiked right here. I turn in aggressively, and by the time I'm hot to this fighter, his missile is almost to me. So there's pretty much the danger, because I'm not going to get a spike on my RWR, and then that missile's there, and I die. I end up trading missiles with him because I'm able to get a missile off, so it's a 1-for-1 kill, but nobody's going home that day. Awesome. So that's really why we have these launch and leave tactics, is to avoid enemy missiles and to maximize our missiles as well. Cool. So first we're going to go through some definitions. Now, I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but I'm going to quickly highlight some of the really, really important ones. And you guys can look at the other ones as you see fit if you've opened up the document. Some really important ones to start off these first four. So visual, blind, tally, and no joy. Visual and blind are when we refer to friendly aircraft or ground positions. So visual is I can see, blind is I cannot see. Now you're talking about elements, 1 and 2 talking to each other. Tally and no joy talk about targets or enemies. Tally means you see the bad guy, and no joy means you can't see the bad guy, but you know you should, and you're looking for him. Okay. Splash means you have hit something, you've killed it. You can visually confirm that it's dead. You can also say kill. It's very much a training specific brevity term, but it's synonymous with splash. It basically means that you, the shooter, or you don't necessarily have to be the shooter, but you as a good guy can see a bad guy and you see him blow up. You see the fireball. Timeout is something we are going to be using a little bit more in this BVR discussion. And that means you as the shooter, you assess a valid BVR shot and your missile has reached termination. So in DCS, we have countdown timers for a lot of our active missiles. I know not every plane does have that, but many do, including the Eagle and the Viper. And when that countdown reaches 0, that's when you call timeout on whatever you were targeted to. Okay? Spike and naked, those are really important. Spike means you're getting RWR indications of an air intercept radar threat in track or launch mode. And naked means you're not spiked. Okay. We're going to be talking about launch and leave tactics today. We've discussed the definition of that. You shoot your missile, turn cold once it's active, and avoid enemy missiles and turn back in. Okay. Now let's see. Let's scroll down a little bit. Target. Oh, sorry. Let's start with commit. Okay, commit is either a directive call from C2 if it's briefed that way, that C2 can tell a bunch of fighters to commit against a group or in a direction, or the flight lead can tell his flight to begin an intercept with a specified direction. More on that later. Target is a directive call from a flight lead, or targeted is an informative call from any individual who is actually looking at a group or a contact on the radar. They see it on the radar, they've locked it up, and they're ready to shoot. They're just waiting for good shot parameters. Okay, so when you call targeted, you own that group. When you sort it, or when you sort, you are looking at individual contacts within a group. So if you have Eagle 1 and 2, that's you and your buddy, targeted against a bad guy group that is 2 contacts, one would directively target, could potentially directively target Eagle 2 to target lead group sort Eastern, something like that. And 2 would say sorted, and 1 would say 1 sorted Western, something like that. We have an example later below. Okay, maneuvers. Yeah, if you want to call a maneuver when a bad guy does in fact maneuver, that's a good essay for everybody. Let's see. Aha, pump. This is going to become a big thing later down. We'll talk about that more, but pump is the word that is used by the flight lead to direct grinder tactics. We're going to talk about that. In and out, these are really important for cap mechanics and also for BVR employment. When you say in, that means you are turning towards a threat or turning hot to the threat axis. If you are turning cold, that's when you voice out. Okay? They're opposites of each other. Delouse is a term that can be used either between C2 and the fighters or between fighters. It's basically like, hey man, there's a dude running me down, delouse me, like get this guy off my back. It's basically what that means. Okay. Right. That's pretty much all we're going to cover. Again, there's more things we didn't mention in that list, and of course there's many more. If you guys do open up the ALSA brevity that's publicly available, there's dozens and dozens of pages of brevity terms that you can look up, and it's fantastic. Great reading. Okay, so now that we are refamiliarized with some of the brevity, I guess I should pause and say, are there any questions on any of that before we continue?
Now, on the in and out, are you talking about fencing in and saddling, or just in and out?
Nope. So that's a great question. This is not fencing in or fencing out. These are turns. Like, we'll have some more examples, and I can talk about that more a little bit later for sure. But it's like, 1 and 2 in left. And that's basically like you're right now. If you imagine that you are flowing cold and you're 2 and I'm 1, we're flowing cold, and I say 1 and 2 in left. We are going to turn left, and we're going to turn hot towards the bad guys. And then once we target and shoot our missiles go active. Then I'm going to say 1 and 2 out left. We're going to turn cold, right? Because we're letting our missiles do their thing. They're on their own. They're fire and forget. And we're going to run away bravely so we don't die.
Now, before you turn out, you got to wait until the missile goes active, right?
Yes. Well, yes and no. There have been times in DCS where I have successfully been able to kill a bad guy, even though I turn out before my missile goes active. Because basically the way the AMRAAM works is that you shoot it. There's, communication between the missile and the fighter jet while the missile is not yet active, while it's still flying towards the target. And then at some point it opens up its aperture. In DCS, it's about 10 nautical miles. So when the missile itself is 10 miles away from your target, it's going to open its eyes, turn on its radar. And that's when you get that indication in your cockpit that the missile is active. And that's when you can turn out. But if for whatever reason that you're being fired upon and you think that you're not going to be able to outrun the missile that's being shot at you, you can turn cold early, and there is a small chance that your missile will still find a target when it opens its eyes.
When it goes pitbull.
Yeah, so that's a good question. I actually didn't cover that, and I should have in the brevity. So there's actually two brevity terms for when your missile goes active. There's Husky and there's Pitbull. Let's go here. Okay, Husky is an active missile is at high PRF, and Pitbull is when that missile is medium PRF. Okay, so active missiles can have multiple PRFs, and that's a very beepy, squeaky radar thing that we don't need to get into. But there's basically two active stages for some radar missiles. So if you say Pitbull or Husky in DCS, it means basically the same thing. Because as far as I know, DCS only models one active state for missiles. So yes, when it goes Pitbull or Husky, you can say either one of those. That's great questions. Anything else before we continue?
I actually have one question. Do you know, did DCS fix it where you can do Mad Dog launches?
So visual arena launches, or you launch it in visual mode. I'm not sure. I don't practice that very often, and
Okay.
yeah, I'm not quite sure. Sorry.
I wasn't sure if it was working yet or not, because I know it on one update it quit working, and then
Yeah. And for the purposes of today, hopefully we never get to that visual arena where we would have to use such a launch. So that is definitely something we can cover when we do within visual range and we talk about merges and such, because that is definitely a tactic that can be used. All right, let's now refresh ourselves with some threat aircraft and basically the whole reason why we need to execute grinder tactics. Okay. So we're all familiar with the things that we can fight in DCS, but it's just, I made this chart. You can look at it more in depth. I'm just going to talk about it very briefly, just to remind us which aircraft can carry active missiles and which ones can carry up to semi-active missiles and what those are. So generally, our highest order active missile threat is going to be the R-77, also known as the AA-12, which is similar to the MRAM. The 27ER, also known as the Tenchuk, is a semi-active missile carried by Russian jets that has a very long range, but it is semi-active. It's like the Sparrow, right? So as soon as you break that radar lock of that fighter, whether you force that shooter to go defensive or you notch him or whatever, you can break that lock and you're going to defeat that missile. However, I have noticed in DCS, it is possible to break a lock and then get reacquired by that same bad guy who has a semi-active missile in the air, and then that semi-active missile will retarget you. I've seen it happen. I don't know if it's a bug or if it's realistic, but it happens, just so you know. Okay. Our biggest threats, just for fun note, are usually the big MiG-25 and MiG-31 especially. We're not going to really talk about them or fight against them today. That's a discussion for another day on how to kill those, and it's very difficult.
Because doesn't MiG-31 have that long range active missile?
It has the R-33, which is in fact semi-active.
Oh, it is semi-active? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I know it can shoot it very far.
It's basically like a Phoenix. It's like a semi-active Phoenix. Yeah, it'll shoot you at 60 plus miles. Yeah, awesome. So if you guys want to take a couple seconds to study that chart a little bit, the other columns that I put in here is like, hey, are they Mach 1 capable? Are they Mach 1.5 capable? And can they go above 40,000 feet? Most of them can, but it's just kind of a reminder of who can and who can't. I may have omitted a few things in there, so I apologize. But basically what that means, and we'll get to it in a little bit more, is when planes can fly faster than Mach 1 and they can get above 30,000 or especially 40,000 feet, that dramatically increases the range of the missiles that they're going to shoot. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So it's really good to know what those particular aircraft can do and when you're going up against them. Okay, so first we're going to talk now about setting up a cap, right? Which is just a couple aircraft, maybe 2 aircraft or 4 aircraft, just maintaining one geographic location and always having at least one radar pointed hot. Maybe you're looking at an airfield, maybe you're just trying to cover a particular area and search for threats, but you always have one aircraft hot. So I'm actually going to play the Tacview now, which is the one that you can see already on your screen. And I should take a moment. Can everybody see the my stream well enough? Like, is it everything a good scale, or do I need to put everything full screen? If anybody's having any issues with that, let me know. Okay, sweet. So this this Tacview right here on the right side of my screen right now. Oh, it's at the end. That's why I won't play. So this is just Wither and me holding the cap in our Eagles. And this is really what it looks like. Okay, we're once somebody's hot, somebody's cold, and we turn in the opposite direction at the same time, and we coordinate our turns. Because we're in the Eagle and we have navigation limitations, it's a little bit difficult to make perfect turns and always reference the same exact location. But as you can see, we can just maintain our cap in between these 2 little islands here in the Persian Gulf, Abu Musa and Siri Island, I believe. So we'll talk about basically how to do that. And the reason that's valuable is, for example, in the upcoming op that we have, if you'd still like to sign in or sign up for that, here's a little plug for it. Check out the events channel. But there's going to be several caps that are going to be maintained because we're going to be looking at airfields and just detecting anybody that takes off and maybe engaging them if they get too close to our friendly forces, right? We're not necessarily on an offensive mission. We're on a defensive mission to patrol this area and make sure no bad guys come from this part of the world to this part of the world. And that's really kind of the point of the cap, okay? So there's a couple different ways you can set this up. First, you can use a waypoint or a geographical reference, such as an island or a mountain, as basically the center point, okay? And that's what Wither and I did here in our Eagles. We pretty much had a waypoint dead center of our cap, and then we would just flow about 10 to 12 miles, either north or south, depending on where we were. And once we reached that range, we would just call our turns hot and cold, and then we just do the same thing, okay? We'll talk about more of the mechanics here in just a second. To initiate this, right, if you're just flying from your airbase tied as a 2-ship, right, you fly to that center point of your cap. You have one flight member continue on the hot leg while another turns cold, right? So you just split at the center point, and then you've already begun your cap, okay? Again, like the way Wither and I did it, I fly about 10 nautical miles away from the center point, turn in the opposite direction, just wash, rinse, repeat until it's time to do something else. The other way to do it, and this is actually one way that I really like to do it in the F-15 as well, is using 2 endpoints of the cap. So basically, you have a waypoint in this particular occasion on the north side and on the south side. So when you reach that point, you automatically turn to the other waypoint. Okay? So you have a hot waypoint and a cold waypoint. Some general notes and good ideas when it comes to executing a cap like this. First, you want to be deconflicted by altitude. So you'll see here I'm about 20,000 and Wither's about 24,000. We each maintained that, plus or minus about 1,000 feet throughout this time. And that's just so we don't run into each other, just in case we drift a little bit, especially given the navigation and SA limitations of the Eagle. Also, when you turn, as much as possible, keep to standard rate left turns unless your flight lead briefs otherwise. So that's basically 30 degrees of bank, and that equates to about 1.2 to 1.5 Gs in the turn. So energy sustaining for sure in a 30-degree bank. It's nice and easy. We're not doing high-performance maneuvers. It's just to get us turning, and we don't need to take forever in the turn, but we don't need to waste a lot of energy turning really tight. Now, there's a some good rules here in terms of our speed. So you'll notice we pretended in this case that south was actually hot. Okay, so bad guy land in this particular instance is actually to the south. So right now in this shot, Wither is hot. You'll notice he's a little bit slower than I am. He's 0.73 Mach and I'm 0.9. When you're in the cold leg, when you're in the hot leg, you want to be a little bit slower. That maximizes your time looking at bad guy land while you're pointed hot. While you're cold in the cap, like I am right here, you want to speed up. You want to basically go mill power. No need to go into afterburner, but basically go mill power. Because when you're cold in the cap, you're not really looking at anything. You're just trying to get to the back of the cap again so you can turn hot again. That's the point of being cold in the cap. So you want to make that happen quickly. Depending on weather, jet limitations, fuel, and your particular altitude, somewhere between 0.75 and 0.85 is a good speed for the hot leg. And in the cold leg, about 0.85 to 0.95. Awesome. The way we communicate this is real simple. It's, 1 hot left, and then 2 would say cold left. That's when you reach this point in your cap. So you're at the extreme ends of your cap, but you're just about to turn. And so in this case, I was 1, Wither was 2, and I'm about to turn cold. So actually, it's kind of the opposite of the example that's typed down there. But in this example, I would say 1 cold left, and Wither would say 2 is hot left, because he's turning south, which is the hot direction, because bad guy land is down here in our example. It's really that simple. Okay. Any questions on?
Yeah.
On that?
Yes. How does the speed discrepancy actually turn once you've done a lot of different turns? Like, how do you keep the 2 aircrafts aligned then, so that you don't have one that's slowly catching up to another? I know they all.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you expect to just be sitting out there for an hour, yeah, that can make a difference. And that's where maybe it might help to have 2 waypoints. So you kind of have a hot waypoint and a cold waypoint. So that would be, right up here and right up here. So you never really exceed the boundaries, right? You're always kind of maintaining the same spot. You're never really drifting. Yeah, over time with the speed discrepancy, you can drift a little bit. And you don't have to stick to this. You can maintain the same speed. Everybody can maintain, 0.8 Mach and kind of saunter a little bit, so you're not wasting a whole lot of fuel. There's no need to go super fast. It really depends how you want to execute it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, what you see in the Tacview example is a 2-ship. Easily can be extrapolated to a 4-ship. If you just pretend that Wither and I each have wingmen, then magically we're a 4-ship, and it's the exact same. If you're
so you stay grouped. You don't actually spread the 4 aircrafts over.
Right. Yep. If we were executing a 4-ship, you would see another little F-15 right next to me, and you'd see another little F-15 right next to Wither. Yep. Awesome. Okay. So that's setting up the cap. And really what this is just a precursor to the grinder and some BVR tactics. Okay. So beyond visual range and tactics are not, and grind tactics are not the exact same, right? Beyond visual range is simply engagements when you can't see the guy and you're out, 30, 40, 50, 60 miles away. But then within that, you can execute launch and leave tactics and do the grind. So we're going to realize they are different things, but we're going to kind of talk about them kind of at the same time. Okay. So again, when we do a grinder, we're doing launch and leave tactics. Basically, you're launching your missile and then you're leaving as soon as it goes active. That's what that means. So here's the kind of a generic timeline that we're going to talk about to accomplish this. Okay. Somewhere between 60 and 100 nautical miles from you, Blue Air, to the bad guys. You're just looking for an initial point out from AWACS. And whether the flight lead directs a commit or C2 directs a commit to a heading, right? So you can commit 180, commit 025, wherever the bad guy is from you. Okay, once you get that commit done, then you want to, if you're going to do the grinder, and you don't have to, but you can just initiate a grinder. And the way we start that, if you guys remember from earlier, is that word pump, right? Oops. Okay. It's a directive call from the flight lead. It can be, Eagle 1 can say 3 and 4, pump left, 1 and 2, continue target lead group. Something like that. Or it can be the opposite. 3 and 4, target lead group, 1 and 2, pump left. And then you would expect your respective flight members to acknowledge just by saying 2, 3, and then you execute, and then you've begun your grinder. Okay. Now, the reason you want to start it at 45 is because the blue air who's going to continue hot and target bad guys, you want to start speeding up and climbing up in altitude to maximize the range on your shots. If you do it by 45 nautical miles, you'll have a good amount of time to basically get your shots off, and climb up a little bit, get your speed up, get your shots off, have your missile go active, and turn cold before you get shot. Now, if you know that your threat is high and fast, so maybe above 30 or 40,000 feet, and they're going greater than Mach 1.0, then you want to back that up a little bit. Even 60 or 70 nautical miles, you can start the grinder. Maybe not more than about that, because then blue air starts to get too far apart from each other once shots start happening. Okay, you just get too spread out if you start it too early. Okay. Once your missiles go active, we've talked about that a little bit already, but we'll see more of that in a bit. That's really when you want to turn cold. It sounds as simple as if I'm 1 and I'm hot and shooting, right? So it's Fox 3, crank left, and then 1 Husky lead group out left. That's really what it is. And that's your cold turn, out left. Now, ideally, you want to be out by 20 nautical miles. And we'll see a little bit more of that, I think, as well in this last Tacview that's coming up. Actually, we have 2 more coming up, sorry. And I think we saw it in that first Tacview that we watched. But if you close within that 20 miles, you run the risk of taking a missile to the face. Also realize that when let's say you're hot to a red air fighter and you turn cold, by the time it takes you to complete that turn, you've lost 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 miles of range, depending on how fast you make that turn, how fast you're going, and how fast the bad guy's going. So you might turn at 20 miles, but by the time you are settled out cold and he's chasing you down, he might be only 16 miles away. Okay. Also a note here, we did see this, I think, in one of my earlier Tacviews, but if you are established cold and you are already within 20 nautical miles, expect when you turn hot that you will have missiles to your face. So you either need somebody to delouse you, or you're going to have to turn in a really fast fire missile and continue your turn out, and maybe you'll survive. Okay. And again, this is all assuming the highest order threats. We've got 27 ETs, 27 ERs, and R77s, that kind of a thing. If you turn cold at fewer than 15 miles, you can expect an R27 ET. You will not get any launch indications of that, at least from a radar perspective, like a spike. If you have a missile warning receiver on your jet, you might get a missile launch indication, but this is an IR guided missile. So it's always good when you're within 15 nautical miles to just dump some flares and avoid burner, unless you really need to get out of Dodge. Okay. So I'm going to play another Tacview here. Just a real short, quick one to show you basically the commit to the climb and accelerate, and then shot, crank, and then descend to begin the outmaneuver. Okay, so we'll get this ranged out here. So again, this is just a 1v1. I lock him up at about 48 miles. You can see I begin my acceleration and climb, basically full burner because Eagle. And we're pressing in within 35 nautical miles. And there I shoot right there. So you can see over here, I've shot my missile at about 34. I'm already at 39,000 feet going Mach 1.0. Okay. You can see from this perspective kind of how I'm climbing up. My pitch is about 20 degrees up on the ladder, full burner, maintaining about 1.0. And that's what allows me to get that 33 nautical mile shot. Immediately, you see me go into a crank. So that crank maneuver is turning away from the threat, but still maintaining a radar lock. And you're basically gimbaling your radar, getting within about 10 degrees of your gimbal, so you can still maintain that lock. But this decreases closure rate. You'll also notice that I've pulled out a burner, so I'm starting to slow down a little bit, and I'm descending. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But you can see my missile does a nice little loft. So the reason I maintain that pitch is because when my missile comes off the rail, you can see it's trying to take that loft profile anyway. So when you're doing these long range shots, you want to loft your missile. You try to get at least 10 degrees up on the ladder when you're shooting your missile. That saves missile energy from having to execute that maneuver itself, and it basically gains more range. Now, let's say I'm flying along here at 35,000 feet level, and then right before I fire, I pull up. Yeah, I'm going to lose a little bit of speed, but that tiny loss in speed to get my nose pointed up and my missile pointed up it's a pretty good trade-off. So try to loft your missiles when you can. Okay, so there's the loft. I level out, slightly descend, pull back the power, and you can see this guy stands no chance. I shot at, 35 plus miles? And at end game, my missile is still going Mach 2. Okay, this guy doesn't stand a chance.
He's in full panic mode.
Indeed. And he pulls classic AI, I'm going to climb to defend. Okay. Now, it's not really demonstrated in this Tacview, but the reason you want to begin a descent, right? So remember I shot at 39,000 feet, and then by the time I'm beginning my outmaneuver, I'm down at 32. I could have done an even more aggressive descent. If I have a missile coming back at me from this MiG-29, if I descend lower, I'm dragging that missile down with me. If I stay up here at 40,000 feet, I'm staying in the missile's sweet spot, right? Missiles love to be high because there's really thin air. So I'm going to descend, and also on my outmaneuver here, I'm also going to descend. I wasn't too aggressive with this, but I'm basically turning out, slicing down, so pointing my nose down while I'm turning fairly aggressively because you're going to use gravity to help maintain your speed. But you can even see I begin descending there. If I would have been a little bit more aggressive, I probably would have descended below 30,000 feet right here. And then when I begin my outmaneuver, I'm probably descending to 25 or even lower. But that would be a pretty aggressive slice maneuver to exit. So. How do we go through all the comm of all of this? Okay. So again, starting all at the beginning of this timeline, you get an initial point out from C2, and then the flight lead voices telling flight commit 180, right? Or whatever heading the threat is, or bearing, excuse me. If there's more picture information to be communicated from C2, that's a great time to get that, right? Maybe there's 2 groups in range or something like that. Once the flight lead has that information, you're going to make a decision on how we're going to attack this, right? So the assumptions for our learning today is that we're going to execute the grind, right? Now, when do we execute the grind? If you're outnumbered, if you're fighting against enemies in range, fight range with range. Those are really good times to execute the grind. Or if maybe you can't actually maybe cross into bad guy territory, maybe you need to grind and stay just outside of bad guy land. Maybe there's SAMs, maybe you can't cross the border, something like that. As we've talked about, the flight lead can pump, or the flight lead can direct other element mates to pump. Okay, so it's just a matter of listening up to what the flight lead says. The example here is Eagle 1, sorry, Talon, we're doing Talon this time. Talon 1 says 3 and 4 pump right, 1 and 2 target lead group. And then the response is 3 from number 3, because he's acknowledging that 3 and 4 are pumping right. He speaks for both 3 and 4. Now, 1 and 2 are going to target as soon as possible. 2 is going to call his target and his sort. 2 targeted lead group sorted eastern, so we're assuming that there are 2 contacts in that lead group. 2 is targeting the eastern. 2 is sorting on the eastern. 1 is sorting on the western. Also, then we're going to shoot as soon as possible. So you're going to call your shots. Talon 2, Fox 3, eastern lead group. Talon 1 says, Talon 1, Fox 3, western lead group. And then immediately crank in the specified direction. Now, flight leads are going to direct that, or element leads. So 1 and 3 are going to direct this, unless you're separated. So if you guys are tied, then you guys act as a single entity. If you're not tied, then do your thing. But you can say crank left, crank right. You can call it direction. You can say crank west, crank east, crank north, crank south. And you use that as an understanding, like I'm going to turn towards that direction. You may not end up perfectly. If you say crank west, you may not end up on heading 270, but you're going to crank towards the west. That's what that means. Again, you're not going to gimbal your radar. You're not going to drop lock. You're just going to get kind of right to the edge there. We've talked about how this minimizes closure rate to bad guys. And what you want to do, of course, is pull back on the throttle. So you were probably in burner if you were climbing up to initially shoot. Then you want to come back out of burner and level out and slightly descend to prep for your outmaneuver here. When you get that indication in your cockpit, if your jet has it, you call when your missile is active. Sorry, 1 second, guys. My dog is trying to steal my snack. All right. Yep, when you get that active indication, you call, again, you can say Husky, Pitbull, in DCS, it means the same thing. Talon 2 would say 2 Husky, 1 would say 1 Husky, and then 1 would say 1 and 2 out, left, or right. And this depends on which way you're cranking. So basically your crank direction, you continue that for your outmaneuver, right? So if you crank to the left, you're going to go out left. If you crank to the right, you're going to go out right. Okie doke. Now, because you are cold to the fight, right? The bad guy's behind you now. You have to call a timeout. When your countdown timer gets to 0, Talon 2 says, Talon 2 timeout eastern lead group. 1 says Talon 1 timeout western lead group. That tells everybody that, hey, a missile should have impacted about this time. And if it didn't, somebody else needs to shoot, right? Or this guy could still be alive. Now, what I've noticed in DCS is both with air-to-air and air-to-ground ordnance, missile and bomb countdown timers are wildly inaccurate. So there's a huge grain of salt here. You have to get to know your jet and really what its capabilities are when it comes to this countdown timer. I've seen missiles impact up to 15, maybe even 20 seconds after my countdown timer expired. And it's because the bad guy maneuvered. So, or, he slowed down or something. really just have to get to know your jet and what its capabilities are. Okay, so again, 1 and 2 are still cold. 3 and 4 are probably still cold at this point, or should be, because we haven't in this example, we haven't seen them call hot left or anything. Really what you're waiting for is for those bad guys to die, hopefully. And if you have a wax controller, you're going to get a picture or a bogey dope, and then you just continue the grinder, right? So it'd be 3 and 4 in left, and then they target whatever's left in that leading edge, the closest bad guys. Or let's say there were a total of 3 contacts, 2 of them died, and you're like, screw it. It's 4v1. We're going to all turn in at the same time. We're going to reform and 4-ship in Bonsai. This guy's going. And 4v1. Sweet. All right. Any questions on that? The calm and the flow for the grinder.
Maybe I have something maybe out of. What do
Yeah,
you
go
do
ahead,
when you
guys.
have multiple inbounds on multiple vectors, pretty much? Like if you're not just facing another group on the same axis, but you're getting 2 close group at a 20, 30 degree difference of aspect, coming both towards you. Maybe
Yeah,
that's
so how do you
already out of subject,
handle
but
multiple
yeah,
at the
more
same
like
time like that?
or where maybe the situation changes a bit and things start spreading left and right, a little bit more. I don't know if there's something there.
Yeah, and this can kind of break down and devolve into chaos, and that can happen. That's totally fine. If that does happen, for planes like the 16 and the 18 and others that have link SA, use that and to the maximum extent possible. Or if you have C2, and maybe just ask for bogey dopes, and have C2 help out with some targeting. When things kind of really devolve and there's a whole bunch of maneuvers, bad guys spread out in azimuth, it gets a lot more difficult. This is really just kind of getting the basics out there to get these initial intercepts and shots going. If there's multiple groups coming at you from multiple angles, then maybe there needs to be a different tactic, and maybe the grinder isn't the best one. You can still do like beyond visual range tactics, where it's like, okay, I'm going to commit to this group. Maybe 1 and 2 are going to commit to the northwest, 3 and 4 are going to commit to the north, and they're just going to execute BVR tactics on their own. Maybe it's not going to be a grinder, so there's not going to be anybody behind them, but they can still climb high, shoot at range, crank, and then turn cold when their missile goes active. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I said it's very good advice. I have one follow up on that, and then I think I'm done. Is what can you do if you can't climb up? If you're a loaded Hornet and you're at 22K and you don't have the fuel, and sure, you're gonna go into BVR engagement, but you're definitely not going to. Like, can you set up a grinder against definitely a faster and higher group of aircrafts coming towards you, or is that just like you're guaranteed to lose?
So that's where it comes to knowing your threats, knowing what's there, what they can carry, or maybe it's a it's a mission where that even though the MiG-29S can carry active missiles, maybe he's not based on your intel brief at the beginning of that operation. Just kind of knowing exactly what is out there and what you can do in your aircraft. So it's very possible that you and your Hornet, if you're low on gas, but you really need to kill these guys, you can't climb up to 35,000 feet and go Mach 1.1. That's fine. If you can climb up to 28,000 and go, mil power and go 0.9, you can still get good range shots, 20, 25 nautical miles. Even if the bad guy is higher and faster than you. If you can shoot first or shoot at about the same time, my experience in DCS is that you will usually come out on top. Now, again, this is AI. This is not PvP. That gets a little bit trickier, but this is more against the AI. And you can still be successful to try to defend yourself.
I guess what you say makes sense about shoot first. What happens if you your trainer set up the grinder and you don't shoot first. You don't have a lot of eyes because you're below, and you get missiles actually fire at you earlier than you can even start, to launch.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do then? Do you just scrap off the whole thing, just turn around and go defensive, or is there still like some kind of an advantage to just push, knowing that you have somebody in the back? And sure, you're going straight in. You're definitely not at an advantage, but because you have somebody in the back with the grinder, you can take that risk.
Yeah, absolutely. You can, if the grinder starts late or you're unable to shoot, because I know that in the Eagle you can be affected by jamming. I know some platforms aren't yet affected by jamming, but there can definitely be times I'm going up against like a Su-30. I get jammed and I can't lock him up on my radar. I'll get with, to 25 miles and I still can't see him. I'll just turn cold and let somebody else behind me take care of him.
Okay.
Or, maybe I'll turn cold, but I won't turn perfectly cold. I'll turn off axis a little bit. Maybe instead of 180 degrees, I'll turn 150 degrees. And then we can kind of approach them from multiple angles and maybe their jamming won't affect us, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? Yeah, if you're that first blue air to go towards red air and you can't shoot or you get shot at first, there's no harm in turning cold, making red air waste their missile, and letting your buddies behind you shoot them. Or if you have ground support, maybe there's a Patriot or a Hawk site that you can run to, and that's going to help you out as well. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. That really gives me like all the type of sequence events that can happen. So I think it's really
And
cool.
so a lot of this, could devolve into needing to go to the merge. And that's not really the scope of this brief. This really is just to kind of stick with the BVR basics. But yeah, there are going to be times where you're going to have to go to the merge, and then you can execute certain tactics like beaming your adversary, descending really low, hiding behind terrain, using maneuvers to defeat their missiles, using chaff and flare to try to get as close as you can. You got to really kind of practice that a lot, get to know your jet, get to know the threats and how they work. And, sometimes you get unlucky, sometimes you get lucky. Any other questions? Awesome, guys.
I have a question.
Yeah, go.
Is it feasible, say, if you have an existing cap going, for flight lead to turn that cap into a grinder? Like, I know it's probably possible, but is that feasible to do?
I think the first part of your question cut out for me, so I apologize. Could you restate it?
Yeah, sorry. Say you had a cap circle going,
Yeah.
and flight lead decides that the situation calls to turn it into a grinder. Is that feasible at all?
Yeah, so kind of like this Tacview demo right here for the cap. It's like we're just going to continue doing this, but we're going to shoot missiles now as well. Is that basically what you're saying?
Kinda, but I was thinking of the grinder being like more aggressive, like climbing and accelerating on the hot leg.
Oh yeah. Like absolutely, yeah. So this cap demo here, it's kind of to demonstrate and kind of kick off the whole grinder thing. Is like, you're just sitting here, you're capping, you're waiting for bad guys to show up, and then let's say a bad guy does get close, and it's like, yeah, in the hot leg, it's like, okay, sweet, Eagle 1, commit, what is this, 360? Commit 360, gonna climb it up, push it up, 2, continue flow cold, basically. And 1's gonna climb up, push it up, fire, execute the BVR tactics, fire, crank, turn cold, call your husky, call your timeout, and then assess, and then maybe 2 turns hot and he also targets that same group or any follow-on groups. Yeah, you could easily just turn this like, hey, bad guy shows up and be like, okay, we're going to commit. There's different ways you can handle that. It's really up to the flight lead. You could, let's say, there's a bad guy who pops up here. I think this is LAR Air Base. OISL is LAR Air Base. Somebody pops up out of there. I think you got about Oh, it's hard for me to see. Can I measure this? Oh, it's 100 miles. Sweet. Yeah, it's 100 miles away. Sweet. You get a pop up there. You get that initial point out. You just reform, right? So you could move this cap. Basically, you're going to move the 2 ship a little further north. You could say 2 reform west side Eagle flight commit north 2. Then you flow north together, and then maybe you start the grinder a little bit later. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, I was just asking if you can conglomerate the cap and grinder. You answered it for me, so thank you.
Yeah, for sure you can. Awesome. If there are no other questions, we'll just talk about targeting a little bit, watch one more Tacview, and then we will take a small break before we actually jump in our planes. Sweet. So targeting, just real generically, some good ideas when it comes to targeting. And one thing that I think we're going to try to do here in the 107th is kind of create a targeting standard. So when we fly in our ops or we fly together, everybody knows what everybody else is doing. So there can be less comm on the radio, but that's kind of a discussion for another day. But some really good ideas when it comes to targeting. Like let's say you are in a 2 ship and you're committing against a bad guy. First, you want to target side. Like if you're on the right side of the formation, you target the contact on the right. If you're on the left side of the formation, you target the bad guy on the left. Right? It just makes things easy, and also near far. So you always want to target the closest guy first, and then you target the guys behind. There can be some caveats to that. We'll actually talk about it down here in a second. Also with targeting, and if you're going against groups in range, again, you only want to target those lead groups when you're firing. You don't want to like shoot the lead group and then a trail group is 10 miles behind him, so you press in even closer and then you try to shoot that trail group. Well, by the time you turn cold, you're going to be right on top of that lead group and they're going to shoot you and you're going to die. So don't bite off more than you can chew, and you want to fight range with range, which is why we introduce the grinder tactics. Okay. If you do want to target follow-on groups in trail, only do so within a few miles. And we just talked about why. And maybe there could be a situation like this where you have 2 F5s in the lead and they're not going very fast and they're not very high, but right behind them a few miles, there's 2 flankers at 38,000 feet going Mach 1.3. What's going to happen is basically those flankers are going to pass those F5s. They're going to become the contacts in the lead. They are a higher threat in terms of the missiles they have, and they're already higher and faster. So that might be a time where maybe you shoot all 4, or you only target the trail flankers, because if you only targeted the F5s that are low and not very fast, or not fast really, then you're going to fire, you're going to turn cold, and basically you're going to have 2 eye flankers running you down, which is no bueno. So it's understanding what's out there, what the threat capabilities are, and how you're going to mitigate those threats. Sweet. If you have 2 groups in azimuth, so they're side by side, you and your flight can kind of offset towards one side to turn that azimuth a little bit more into a range, and you can try to attack it that way. You can turn cold against the first contacts that you shoot, and then you can recommit and kill the next guys. And you don't need to offset 90 degrees, but you can just offset a little bit to try to turn it into a little bit more of a range rather than a pure side to side. Okay, now we're going to talk about shooting. This is specific to the AIM-120, so sorry if you're a J11 pilot and you don't carry the AIM-120, or if you're a 14 pilot and we're not talking about the Phoenix. But this is kind of some shot ranges that I've found have been really effective in, for example, the Viper and the Eagle when shooting the AIM-120. Couple assumptions here. If you are hot to the adversary and the adversary is hot to you, the adversary is within 10,000 feet of your altitude, and that adversary is greater than about 0.8, 0.9, you are also 0.9 or faster, you can basically use your altitude in tens of thousands of feet as a rough shot range estimation. So basically, if you are at 50,000 feet, holy cow, you can probably shoot at about 50 miles. Maybe you have to push in a little bit further, but you might get a shot queue at 50 miles. I've done it in the Eagle. It's awesome. And then if you're at 40,000 feet and your adversary's within 10,000 feet, you can shoot at about 40 miles, and so on and so on. Now, let's say there's a really big altitude difference between you and your adversary. If it's greater than 10,000 feet, take off about 10 miles for every 10,000 foot difference beyond that initial 10,000 foot. So if you're at 40,000, your target's at 20,000, you're going to shoot at roughly 30 miles. Okay? Because if you were at 40 and he was at 30 per this previous rule, you could shoot at about 40 miles. But since he's a bit lower, you're going to change that down to about 30. It's just kind of give you a rough estimate. Now, a lot of these jets have shot cues, like in the F-15, I get Bitch and Betty tell me, shoot, or whatever she says. That's a pretty good indication. I find it fairly reliable, but I've also taken shots outside of Bitch and Betty's recommended range, and they've still been successful, usually when I'm pretty high and pretty fast. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good estimation of what your AMRAAM can do. Again, it's a generic rule. It's to get you in the right ballpark. Every situation is different. So we can't really nail down exact numbers for every situation because they would be needlessly detailed and nobody would ever be able to remember it for every single situation. So again, that goes back to getting to know your jet, getting to know your adversaries, and what your missile can do. All right, one last Tacview. Any questions before we get this playing? Awesome. So this one's a little bit longer Tacview, but it won't take too long at all. This is TMO and me again. We're flying the F-16 this time, and we're going to go up against some adversaries here just to kind of show you the success of the grinder one final time. So TMO and I are here. We're a little bit in azimuth. TMO turns cold to the left. I press in, shoot greater than 25 nautical miles. So you'll see that the adversary is below 30,000 feet. He's only going Mach 1.0. I'm not able to climb up super high, and I'm still only about Mach 1. So that's kind of where we get, about that 30 nautical mile range, and I pressed in a little bit. I decided to do that because there's, two Su-33s here. So who remembers from the chart the most dangerous missile that they carry? Anybody?
27 ALSA Petey.
Yes. Yep. So semi-active threat is what I'm worried about at range. And then if I press in too close, I'm worried about that long range IR threat. So I know I have an advantage with the AMRAAM here. As long as I shoot before they do or at about the same time they do, I win. So you can see that here. I shoot, what did I say, 25-ish miles, 26 miles. I shoot against the 2-ship. I crank. Let's see, what is my crank? So heading 275, and then I crank about 40, 45 degrees.
Quick question here. You're firing in TWS?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep,
So that's
I'm
a valid way to, as long as you're going to be cranking.
Yep.
But if you're targeting a single guy, would you still fire in TWS or would you go full STT then?
I almost always fire in TWS. That's personal preference. If you're firing against just one target, you could go STT, but I like to maintain the SA on the other contacts that are around, if there are any.
Okay then.
There are certain personal situations where I will go STT, and that's like if I know this guy's going to maneuver, he's already maneuvering, and he's like the only guy that I'm going to target because it's my last missile, I might switch to STT. But the Eagle does have a limitation. I don't know about the Viper, but the Eagle has a limitation where if you have fired your missile and you fired it in TWS and then you go STT after launch, your missile countdown timer disappears on your HUD, and it drives me freaking nuts. So that's one reason why I almost never go STT. So as you can see, this guy fired an ER, but he was defensive against my AMRAAM shortly after he fired, so this missile goes stupid. In this case, I believe one hits. Yep, I think I hit that Eastern. He's about to die. the southern, that's a north and a south contact. I kill the northern, the southern defeats my missile, and my AMRAAM decides to go out to lunch to the south. Thanks. I call out, TMO is already in over here. So my range is within 20. TMO is, hello, why can't I do this? There we go. TMO is about 37 nautical miles when he turns hot. So he has plenty of time. He's already up in the 3 block and he's going to push it up. He's going to launch at about Mach 1.0, maintaining about the same altitude. He's able to launch at a range of about 30 nautical miles. He elects to shoot twice. And fortunately, that first missile does get him. So that's an effective way, just a 2v2, right? Where effective use of the grinder there. So then we reform and take on the next group, I think, or do we go land here? Yeah, and then we go after these guys right here. So we commit, and at about 50 miles, 45 miles, we begin that grinder. So we were kind of right on the edge of that brief timeline to start the grinder. So as you can see, TMO fires at about 30 nautical miles. He's only Mach 1.0, but he's up high at 40,000 feet. These are 27s, and who remembers the highest order threat from the 27?
Semi-active.
Yeah, it's semi-active. Yep. So we can press in a little bit here on these guys, just like the Su-33. So he only is able to take one shot. Unfortunately, it misses, but you can see how he's able to defeat this missile here because he's able to force his adversary defensive. Basically, so the adversary probably doesn't maintain a radar lock, but also TMO is descending. Right after he shoots, you see this pretty aggressive descent from 47 all the way down to the mid-3 block right there. And then he's out and he's still descending. So that's a pretty good 20,000 foot difference. And that's what you want to do because then this second missile is just being dragged down into thicker and thicker air. Okay, I recommit about the same time. So TMO calls out left, I call in right. And I'm just looking with my radar to see what's still alive using my SA from the HSD on the Viper, and I take 2 shots, and fortunately both die. So in the first example, we saw how we were able to kill 1 and then 1, and then the second example, it was 0 and 2 for the radar deaths. So really emphasizing how the grinder can be really kind of a lifesaver. Okay, we rearm, refuel, and then this last one is a lot of fun. At least it was fun flying it. So we take off again. We're going to press up towards north of Tonopah, actually. And there's a whole bunch of aircraft that spawn, so somebody keep count of all the deaths. All right, so we do have to worry about this SA-10 out here. It does become a little bit of a factor. Bam. But first we have 2 contacts at 5s, easy. We still shoot at range because we know that we have the SA-10 over here that's already fired on TMO. I'm sorry, that's me. Has already fired on me. Even though these are F5s, I'm still shooting them at 25 nautical miles to maintain our range. Because if you can imagine, I have this SA-10 shooting at me, and I have Su-33s not far in trail of that F5, only about 15 miles in trail. And you can also see they're going Mach 1.2 and high. And these F5s are freaking slow, right? So these flankers are going to overtake those F5s or get close to them. So TMO and I are going to maintain our defense in depth by not going to the merge with those F5s. I shoot the F5s. TMO, we don't actually start the grinder here. We just kind of bracket. We separate in azimuth. TMO goes after the trail group flankers. Okay, he squares up. And I know that regardless of how these shots turn out, I'm turning cold. And TMO is also going to turn out cold to the right, as I'm pretty sure here in a second. But I turn cold to the right because I have this SA-10. If I turn cold left, I'm taking a missile to the face. And so TMO actually basically does a split S. Yeah, he presses in within 30 miles, gets some really good shots off, and he kills both of them. But you can see how even waiting to within, between 25 and 30 nautical miles, when that guy gets his shot off, like that missile's fast, right? Because this guy's at 38,000 feet going Mach 1.2. You can see the speed on that missile. Like, holy cow. He shoots later, but his missile almost gets to TMO by the time that bad guy dies. So that just goes to show you shooting early wins the battle. So if this had been an active missile, it might have been a little bit higher threat for TMO, but he was able to kill that bad guy against who was shooting a semi-active. So we're good to go there. All right, we reform. Oh, look, there's even more. So here we start the grinder because we know there's just a smattering of dudes. We don't want both of us to commit against this because he can shoot a couple times, I can shoot a couple times, but we maintain our defense in depth. So we start the grinder. What range was that? 75, 80 miles when we start the grinder. So pretty much at the extreme end of when you want to do that. As you can see, I actually turn hot before TMO even fires. So a little bit of a modification here, but this demonstrates that if you start too early, then yeah, you have defense in depth, but everybody's hot at the same time. And then we're probably going to almost be cold at the same time, which is something you do want to try to avoid. You don't want everybody cold at the same time. So TMO's going to fire. He's going to actually kill. Yep, we're going to have a pretty high PK. That's pretty awesome. You'll notice how TMO initially, right, he climbs up. He's full burner. We've dropped our bags. Hashtag Light Viper. Yep, at 50,000, 1.0. And he's getting some really awesome shots. Like that missile is still almost Mach 3 at endgame. So he could have shot even earlier, but he really gave that missile a high chance of success in both cases. Yeah, he turns cold. I'm about... about 30, 25 nautical miles in trail. I'm able to see that those lead contacts vanish away. And then I'm able to execute a few shots. And I'm going to, again, crank to the north, which seems a little bit, I can put this in a different view, maybe seems a little bit counterintuitive because I'm actually cranking towards these northern bad guys, but I'm cranking away from this SA-10. And I don't want to get close to that SA-10. So I got lucky as well. Both my missiles hit, so we're just crushing these dudes. All right. I'm able to turn cold, and I'm still, oops, what's this range going to be? I'm still 22 miles away. Fortunately, these guys aren't super fast, but we do have this one fast guy. So TMO's going to turn hot, and he's going to shoot twice more. Again, we're getting in close now because as the grinder progresses, you lose more and more range, right? Because bad guys are still flowing towards you, but you're able to preserve that range as long as you possibly can. So he shoots at about 25 nautical miles, shoots 2 contacts, is able to defeat. See, this first missile comes from this guy who's defensive. That's why that first shot goes trash. So the second missile comes from this guy who kind of maneuvers, but TMO is able to go out pretty quickly. Again, TMO's slicing down. He's descending in altitude, so we see this. We'll back it up. He fires up here at 40,000+ feet. He descends and then he slices out. He descends all the way to 15,000 feet because he knows he's pressing in. And when you drop down, he's dragging this missile down with him, gives it absolutely no chance. This is where we see I recommit. We're basically backs against the wall at this point. So we have to recommit or get run over. I turn back in, even at a range of 26 miles, I'm taking a missile to the face before I'm even fully hot to this contact. Okay, so I get shot at. This is a 27 ER because this is a Su-27, so that's all it has. I'm able to basically square up for just a couple seconds, lock, fire, and just continue my turn. Okay, I never actually fully square up against this guy. I don't go straight and level. I know that by the time I continue my turn here, my missile is going to be about 10 miles away, which is the active range for the M120 and DCS. And you will see, if I change back to this perspective, okay, I'm up high and fast right here, and I slice down. I actually go too far, and this is a personal mistake that I made for sure. Drop in chaff and flare, defeat that first missile, but I actually wanted to turn east, but I ended up actually continuing to the north, but then I corrected it there. But you'll see how huge of an altitude drop I had, which drags this missile down with me, makes it lose a lot of energy, in addition to breaking the lock. There's still one more guy. He didn't want to die, because I was only able to get one shot off here. I was hoping to get both, but I was only able to get the one. And Timo, if I remember correctly, was actually out of missiles. Sorry, at least out of AMRAAMs. He was skosh, as they say. So I'm like, well, this is all me, because I'm 1 by 1 at this point. And I got lucky. Oh no, I may have only had a 9X, because that's why I shot a 9X. So yeah, I don't even have any AMRAAMs. We might have both been out of AMRAAMs at this point. I turned back in. Timo was wearing a spike, so I was not being spiked. I was naked. And I was like, well, I'm going to kill this guy. I turn in hot. You see that the bad guy turns in hot. I have a 9X locked on him, and this range is ridiculous for a 9X shot, right? Beak to beak. I had him locked here, about 10 miles. You can see I'm dumping chaff and flare to avoid any missiles that might be off the rail already. And I shoot and just barely evade. I'm out of chaff and flare, and I just go cattywampus. I get really lucky and kill him. But yeah, we live to fight another day. I think it really demonstrates the power of the grinder, how we were able to kill, 8 contacts? Did anybody keep count? I didn't. But it goes to show you the power of the grinder. All right, that's all we have for that portion. Anybody need a small break before we jump in and start killing some stuff ourselves?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
10 minutes.
Yeah, we'll take a couple minutes here, guys, and I'll let's see. At the bottom of the document, I'm going to post the server and the password. And you guys can jump in whenever you want. If we can admin pause the server,